Welcome back. We're moving into the part of the camp where we're going to start to use objects in the way they're intended to be used. And so we need to talk about the difference between attributes and variables at this point. So when we're done with this, you can tell the difference between attributes and variables and get some idea of why you would choose to use one over the other, and talk about visibility, whether or not basically, who do you allow to see these attributes? As a reminder, 5 parts to computation. We've gone through declaration and assignment so far in the camp, so you've been able to declare variables and you've been able to assign values to those variables, and then you can print out the results. We're going to go back to declaration here to talk about declaring attributes. Also, if you remember, we've talked about what objects are. Just a reminder, objects are things that belong to a category or class, and they have 2 parts: attributes that describe them and methods that change the values of those attributes. The difference between an attribute and a variable is this: a variable is declared inside of a method. The attributes are declared outside of all the methods. So when you build a class, you have a section where you declare all your attributes, and then you have a section where you write up all the methods that can modify those attributes. And the trick is that all of the methods have access to all of the attributes. So this is going to help us determine when we want to use an attribute or a variable. If an item is needed only inside of one method, not needed all over the place, we're going to declare that thing inside of the method that it's used in, and we're going to call it a variable. But if the thing is needed to describe the state of the object all the time, we're going to call those attributes. We're going to declare those outside of any method, and any method can use them. So, for example, we talked about the sheep-sheepdog game earlier, and we talked about that the sheep would have X location, Y location. That's probably a good attribute, number one, because it describes where the sheep is, and number two, there's probably a number of methods that would like to have access to that information. There's probably a bunch of several methods that we can think of that would want to know where the sheep X and Y locations are. Okay, public or private? Well, let's see. We can tag these things as public, meaning entities outside of the class can see them, or private, meaning only entities inside the class can see them. And the rule is make all your attributes private. Just make all your attributes private by default. And then for methods, most methods we will make public. Almost all methods we will make public. And if you think of a method as the ability to use an object, then you want other entities to be able to use that object. It's kind of like if you have a car but you lose the car keys, all of a sudden you can't get inside the car. Well, all of the methods that you would use to work the car are now private, and therefore the car is no good. You want public access to the methods. You want no public access to the attributes, so you make them private. One of the biggest things, one of the biggest reasons that the object-oriented paradigm was developed was to do something called data encapsulation, basically protecting the data, and this is how you do it. You make your data private, so only that class or object can modify or use that data. Okay, as you remember, this is review. What about the data types? We have the integer, the double, which is what we've been using so far. We have the char and the string. We haven't really used those yet, and the Boolean, which we haven't used yet. But the same kind of declaration occurs for attributes. It's going to be the name, the data type and the name, but in front of that we're going to put either public or private. For an attribute, it's going to be private. How does it look in Notepad? Well, let's see. If we were actually to start to code up a stapler object, stapler class, we would say, Okay, what do we want to describe the stapler? And some things we would want to describe are the location and the number of staples. And so we would declare those as attributes. So if you look on lines 12 and 13 here, you'll notice I'm declaring these things outside of any method. They are not contained in any method. And because they're attributes, I'm going to make them private. So I don't just say int number of staples on line 13. I say private int number of staples. And then if we want other entities to use the staple, we'll give public methods for those other entities to use the stapler. So public void staple, don't worry about void for the moment. Public void refill. Okay, and you'll notice what public void staple does on line 16. It takes the number of staples you have and it reduces it by 1. Well, how is it gaining access to number of staples? Number of staples is an attribute. All the methods have access to the attributes. So when I do the refill method, which starts on line 19, I can refill, meaning set the max number of staples. Notice that's a variable inside of there. And then number of staples equals max number of staples. And so number of staples, which is an attribute, would get modified from whatever it was to 100 in this example. So we have methods that are modifying these attributes. Every now and then you're going to have methods that don't modify the attributes. They just report, like they print out results or they print out values or something like that. But as a rule, the idea is attributes describe the object, methods are able to modify or change the attributes. So remember, our objects are things that belong to a class. They have two main parts, the attributes and the methods. Attributes describe their state, methods change the state. Attributes are declared outside of all the methods, and all the methods may have access to all the attributes. And make your attributes private. Make most methods public. We'll probably talk about some situations where you might have a private method, but as a general rule, private attributes, public methods.